Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Tales of a TC. I am joined by my lovely co-host, Della Ray. Hi.
Hello, how are you?
Good, good. How are you?
Well, Friday. It's great. Everything is great.
At least it's not the end of month Friday before a holiday.
Right, like last week. But this week just kind of like it flew by. I'm just
Okay.
like, I can't believe it's Friday already. So, yeah, glad to
Awesome.
be here with you again.
Yes, I love doing these. And I'm excited today because we decided to talk about what happens before you pay your deposit. Like there's a lot of moving pieces that, investors don't know about. And, I see a lot of investors kind of push back about even making a deposit to their TCs.
Right.
And so I was hoping that today we could kind of have a conversation on what we're doing, maybe behind the scenes or before we even really start the transaction according to the deposit and stuff like that. So, why don't you tell me a little bit about your process for your due diligence before you start a file?
So essentially, what I'm doing when I get a file is I will look over the contract, and then I will also look up the county records for that address. So checking things like, is it one seller or two sellers versus, what's on the contract? Why did only one person sign, but there's two people on the county record? What happened to that second person? Did they die? Are they divorced? Like, what's the reason here? Also making sure all of the numbers work, making sure that, everything that the realtor wrote in there, because oftentimes the realtor is drafting up these contracts, making sure that the wholesaler understands what was put in the contract. So I had a contract yesterday that said that the buyer is going to be responsible for all penalties and past due taxes. And I'm thinking to myself, what do you mean all penalties? Like if a judgment comes up, which it did, by the way, it was like a $2,000 judgment, and they owe, I don't know how many thousands of dollars in back taxes. And the wholesaler went and signed on this contract that said that they're going to be responsible for all of these fees. So going through the contract, making sure I understand the numbers, making sure I have a very broad overview of exactly how the deal is going to be shaped, right? Because this is a recipe that we're looking at, and making sure that I understand how all the ingredients play together, right? So, if there a realtor on board, is there, I see that the seller's getting cash at close of escrow, for example, is like $11,850. And then the section that talks about the realtor, it says $11,850 to be paid by the buyer. So does that mean that it's the same $11,850 that the seller is getting? Or is it an additional $11,850? So we're just looking at these contracts, trying to make sense of everything before we even say to the wholesaler, yes, we can do this deal, or no, we can't do this deal, or what other questions we might have about the deal. Which is something, and it takes time, doing all of this digging and this due diligence before we actually say that, yes, we can take on this file. Please send me my deposit. It's still time that we're putting into the file beforehand.
Yes, especially like vetting title companies.
I was just thinking about that as well. Right.
Yes.
Right. I,
Making sure that I really like, especially my return clients, before they ever sign an assignment agreement, to please send me the purchase agreement, the assignment agreement, so we can make sure we're all on the same page. Because
right.
a lot of times the contracts will be written pro whoever's writing them, right? So you might get an assignment contract that you in writing agreed to one thing with the wholesaler. I just had this happen a couple days ago that they sent me the marketing write up and then they sent me the assignment agreement and the purchase prices weren't the same. And I wrote back to my potential buyer and I was like, "Hey, these numbers don't match." And I also like to see on a creative deal, I like to see that the entry fee is broke down on the assignment agreement, because you want to make sure that we understand what the agent's getting paid. At that point, it's not about arguing your assignment fee or anything like that. We're just trying to make sure that they're line item it out so that everyone gets paid and everyone's transparently on the same page.
Right. Absolutely. And that's important because when these things are not discussed and we don't understand this beforehand, it's virtually impossible for us to balance a settlement statement if we have no idea how the numbers are actually supposed to work. Right? Just with that one example alone of like cash to seller 11,850. Okay, now when I'm looking at the settlement statement, are they netting out 11,850, or is that 11,850 now going to go to the realtor and the seller gets zero? Right? So very important to understand how all of those numbers are supposed to play out on a settlement statement, because 9 times out of 10, the wholesaler doesn't know how to read a settlement statement, so they wouldn't even know if it was wrong or not just by looking at it. So we definitely need to, make sure that we understand those numbers. And in terms of the title company, 100%. I got deals yesterday and I'm looking at the title companies and I'm like, have you worked with them before? No, but they said they do creative. Okay, what does that mean? So I get on the phone and I call them and they're telling me, oh, yeah, well, I don't know if we can provide insurance on an FHA or VA underlying mortgage. Okay, well, can you ask your underwriter? Oh, well, I'll talk to the seller. I'll talk to the owner of the company about it. And then as we get to talking more, oh, I've only ever done this once before. And I'm like, do you really want to keep this title company? Because I have one that does them all the time, or we can, sit here and try to get this done. But oftentimes it ends up being a disaster. And I prefer to work with title companies that I know how to do creative deals. For a title company to say that they know how to do creative really doesn't mean anything.
100%. Or even to say that they'll do sub to you,
Right.
and you could work with an attorney and then they're like, oh, but we don't do wrap documents.
Right.
We don't, or, and so asking the questions to make sure that there's the complete follow through of the transaction. I think that is so overlooked. And a lot of times when you're working with agents are going to say, you have to use my title company. And
Right.
I'll work with whoever as long as they're willing to do the transaction completely.
Yeah. Yes, that
My
is so true.
title insurance is like a non-negotiable in my opinion. Like I've had too many things come up, modifications, other liens on properties later when we go to sell later, or anything like that, that it's just crazy to me that people would bypass title insurance.
Right. Right. I have one now where the deed of trust from before the seller bought the property is still showing up on the title commitment because they didn't receive a satisfaction of lien from the bank. And now they have to go into and from 2017. And sometimes these banks just like they just poof, they disappear. And it's like, how do we find this now? So definitely need to make sure that they know what they're doing and that they understand the deal structure 100%. And I think when you're an investor and you don't really know what questions to ask, you're gonna be like, oh, okay, yeah, they said they can do creative, right? But it's not until somebody actually understands the underpinnings of what that actually looks like that can ask the right questions that will know if they actually know how to do creative or not. So I think it's important to have a TC who's going to be able to do that. But also, those are the things that we do before we even ask for a deposit. Well, I know you and I do that before we ask for, even for a deposit. We've already done a pretty good amount of work at that point because it's, all of the due diligence, the research, the conversations, making sure that we have everybody on the same page, all before we even start the file.
And that's with us turning away a lot of clients that don't make it even to the point of us starting the file because
Right.
we don't want to start on something that's not viable.
It's just a waste of time.
Yes. Or like my favorite is when the purchase agreement, it's September right now, and the purchase agreement was written on a mortgage statement from April. I'm like, a whole lot happens between April and now, but
Right.
your first transaction, if the agent has never done transactions like this, they don't understand that you can't just use any mortgage statement to create a purchase agreement, because what happens if the payments haven't been made, which is very often,
Right.
there's all kinds of pieces here. And so I encourage investors that if you're working with a TC that's asking for a deposit up front, it is because most of our work is front loaded.
It is. It really is. I've had them say to me, well, a traditional TC gets paid at close of escrow. Well, this is not a traditional transaction. We have to deal with the real estate agents. And oftentimes even that in and of itself is more complicated than a traditional transaction, because now we have to explain, yes, I understand that this is your seller. And yes, I understand that, you want to keep everything confidential until we close, but we really can't, right? We need to get into their portals. We need to talk to them. We need to, have these conversations up front. We need their contact information. I had an agent tell me, oh yeah, you'll get all of that at close of escrow. We can't get to the closing table if we don't have that information first.
Right. And if you're signing an assignment agreement, like if you're not the one that had those conversations with the agent, that stuff needs to be included in your assignment agreement. And I had a wholesaler push back this week, and he was like, "Oh, well, we've already talked about all of that with the agent." I'm like, "Congratulations." I still want that in our assignment agreement, that we have to have portal access 3 days before the closing, that we have to have the buyer and seller need to be able to have a conversation before closing. We need contact information all before closing. And I need that in the assignment agreement, because I've had situations, and granted, we learn through lots of transactions,
Right.
but I've had it to where an agent won't release that information until closing. And then we're trying to figure out everything. And sometimes those sellers, as soon as we close, are no longer participating.
Right.
And so if you don't make that contingent on your closing on the front side, you can't make it contingent on the back side.
Right. It's true. It is true. And that's why every time I get a deal, I make sure to have a conversation with the agent, because people say things, right? Like the wholesaler will be like, yeah, they understand. And then at the end of the day, they really don't get it. So I have to hop on the phone. I'll ask them, hey, is this your first time doing a subject to transaction? Oh, no, but I've heard about it. Okay, so let me just walk you through what the process looks like. And as I'm explaining this to them, then they understand why I need to get access to their seller. And they're more likely to give me that access than if I don't talk to them about it, right? Because they're just like, who are you and why do you need this information? And no, I'm not giving it to you, right?
Right. Well, and you can also clear the air. A lot of times we'll get assignments that the underlying mortgage says, or the underlying agreement says, that if the buyer defaults, the house reverts back to the seller, which I know drives you and I crazy. But the agent might genuinely think that that's what happens.
They
And
do.
if we don't have a conversation, and then like once you start putting the pieces together, like my favorite thing to tell the agent is, you've closed a lot of transactions. You know that a deed transfer does not happen without a process. So
Right.
there's no way there can be an automatic reversion. Deeds just don't magically change.
Oh, they sure don't. Every time I see that on a contract, it makes me cringe. Like, why
Yeah,
are wholesalers telling the sellers this? Like, this is not okay. This needs to be discussed, and they need to have extreme clarity surrounding the process of like, what does it look like if a buyer defaults? And I get it; it's scary to have that conversation because they're thinking, oh, the seller's not going to want to sell if they don't think they're going to get it back right away. But you have to set expectations from the very beginning, because if you don't, then the seller's going to feel like you blindsided them. Oh, well, they told me I was going to get my property back right away if they defaulted, and now they come to find out that they can't. That it's not just like, oh yeah, flip a switch and you have your property back. It doesn't work that way. Even when you put it in a land trust, it doesn't work that way. No matter which way you do this, it's never just going to magically revert back to the seller. So maintaining and managing expectations from the very beginning, and I always say this, I think it helps alleviate so many problems. and prevent a lot of problems too. Just have the hard conversations from the very beginning and make sure everybody's on the same page, and then we can move across get it to the closing table and not have any complications, because everybody already understands what the deal structure is and what actually happens or doesn't.
And when you're the end buyer, you can't trust that anyone else is having those conversations. You can't trust that the wholesaler's TC is having that conversation. You can't trust that the wholesaler had that conversation. Sometimes I can't trust that the agent really had that conversation with the seller. And everyone's going to say, like, oh, well, the seller signed the disclosures. And you and I both know that most of these people get these e-sign things and do not read
You don't
one
read them.
of it.
No. They just sign away, click, click, click. They don't even read it.
And this isn't a cash transaction or a traditional transaction that there's not long-term implications for the seller. There are long-term implications. And so we have to do our due diligence to ensure that the seller understands what they're doing.
Right. 100%. And the sellers will always come to me and they'll ask questions when I make that initial phone call to introduce myself and just kind of let them know what we're going to be doing and what I'm going to be sending them over. And because I never want to send a DocuSign over with a seller information packet and they're like, who is this random person sending me information wanting to know like my forwarding contact information and my portal logins and all of this stuff? So I have that conversation and I let them know. And then I say, do you have any questions about this transaction? Is there anything that you're not clear on? And we end up talking sometimes 30 minutes, 45 minutes, because they have like questions that nobody answered for them, or they just hadn't thought of when they were signing the contract. So I think it's very helpful to have somebody to have these conversations with the seller. And, as TCs, I think our main objective is really just to have communication with all parties and making sure we know that everybody's on the same page because of our various conversations with everyone else as well.
Agreed. We just really want to make sure that both the buyer and the seller have a good relationship from the go and are kind of set up for success in the long run.
Right. Because it can be very problematic if they're not. Yeah. I've seen situations where they've walked away from the closing table and they felt so slighted by maybe something, the wholesaler did, or maybe something the buyer did, or a lot of backpedaling on, oh, well, I'll pay the arrears. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh no, the arrears are coming out of your money. Crying in the title company's bathroom, not wanting to get out. And the only person they would talk to after the fact was me, because they didn't want to be involved with the buyer. You cannot do a subject to transaction where the buyer and the seller don't communicate after closing. It's not going to make for a very pleasant experience after the fact later on down the line when you guys need to talk to them.
Absolutely. And sometimes I have to push my investors to like keep that relationship with the seller. I have some that are like besties from the beginning and they talk to the seller all the time. And then I have other investors that don't really want to invest in that relationship. And I think that they don't understand this is such a scary time. Like the seller's taking a risk. They're trusting this person they don't really know.
Right.
And as a buyer, it's kind of your job to give them that good feeling. Like I have one client that refuses to have a seller not make money at closing. Even if it's $500, he makes sure that the seller makes money every closing, because that's how, I don't know, that they're taking this big risk. And I know like maybe they owe money or whatever, but that's how you start a partnership. You start it with both parties winning.
100%. And that's what we're here to do, is to make sure that everybody's winning. So I agree with that. And I actually love that your buyer does that, because I have a lot of buyers who are just fine with the seller not getting anything. And it's just kind of like, they are giving up probably one of the only huge assets that they're ever going to have. And just giving it away for free like that, I'm sure nobody feels good about that.
Especially if like an agent's making money and a wholesaler's making money. Right. Like there probably needs to be some money in the pot for the seller.
Right.
Right. But, and you know,
Right.
I'm sure there's instances that doesn't make any sense at all. But I just think it's a good start to a partnership, if they feel like you gave them something.
Right. They didn't just walk away empty-handed. Yeah.
I had one client that I no longer work with, but the seller wasn't supposed to make anything, and then the buyer made them pay the notary fee. So the seller literally had to bring $150 to closing
No
to
way.
close the transaction.
What? Oh, that's
And it's
insane.
just bad business.
That's insane. I can't even. That's horrible. Poor seller.
Right. And what's going to happen? Like sometimes on these transactions, you need the seller later.
Oh yeah.
Like, and it's,
Especially if they call the note due.
yes, or to release the lien when you
Right.
refinance or sell the property. Like you just want that seller to not think ill of you when you're
Right.
doing it.
That's important. I don't think people understand the value of those relationships. They just see it as very transactional. And these deals are not transactional. This is not, a conventional closing where buyer and seller don't need to know who the other person is, don't need to see each other, nothing. This is, like Pace is always saying, this is more of a marriage than anything else.
Agreed. With a lot of trust, like a lot of
Right.
financial risk
Right.
in this. So I love it. Well, Ella, thank you today and
Thank
talking about your
you.
process.
Yes, thank you for having me. Always happy to be here.
Do you have anything else to add? Small tidbits for investors to think about, when they're initially thinking about signing a contract or anything like that?
Make sure you read through the contract and you understand what you are responsible for. That is the
Worst,
best way to prevent any surprises.
worst case scenario, put it through Chat GPT and ask all the questions.
Right. That's
Like
a good thing to do.
I know that some of that terminology and everything is weird, but if you have questions, ask them. Ask for things to get written more plainly. Like I've seen some verbiage in contracts and I'm like, I don't even understand what that means.
Right. Explain this to me like I am a junior high schooler or something, and it'll dumb it down. Not dumb it down, but it'll make it put it more in layman's terms for us. I do it all the time because I mean it's a lot easier for me to I'm reading through it and I understand, but I want to make sure I get all of the nuances. Is there anything that I'm missing? Because lawyers tend to put contracts together and they're very circular in their wording. And I think that a lot can get missed when they write in such a fashion. And they do it on purpose, right? Because that's the whole point. But it's not meant for like everybody to understand. But I think in our position and as a buyer, you need to know what you're getting into. You really need to know what that contract says. So put it in GPT and ask it all the questions, like you said. Make sure you get the warm and fuzzies about everything that it says, because if it shows up that you're responsible for past due taxes now, and you didn't know that that's what you were signing for, don't be surprised when you get a $10,000 bill that you were not expecting at close of escrow.
100%. And do that before you sign.
Right,
And if you don't understand, ask for clarity to be put into the contract.
right,
So
100%.
I love it. All right, Ella. Well, I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You too. Have a great weekend.
You too.